The call came on a Tuesday evening, and I remember because I had just burned my hand on the grill lid. I was out back, doing what I do most evenings since I retired. A couple of pork chops, some corn wrapped in foil, a cold beer sweating on the patio railing. My dog Buck was asleep under the chair. The neighborhood was quiet the way it only gets after 6 in October. That particular stillness where you can hear the leaves scraping across the driveway 2 houses down. My phone buzzed on the armrest. I figured it was my daughter calling to say she and her fiancé were running late for Sunday dinner, but the name on the screen wasn't hers. It was his. In the 2 years since my daughter Audrey had started dating Miles Thornton, he had never once called me directly. Not once. We exchanged polite conversation at family dinners. We shook hands. He complimented my daughter loudly whenever I was in the room, like a man performing for an audience, but he'd never had a reason to call me, not until that Tuesday. I wiped my hand on my jeans and answered. "Hey there," I said. "Yeah, hi. No warm-up. No sir, no how are you." Just the voice of a man who had already decided this call was beneath him. "I'm going to get right to it because I've got a dinner reservation in 20. We're doing a strategy planning session this weekend. Investors, partners, a few people from the firm. Audrey's going to be there, obviously, but I think it's better if you sit this one out." I didn't say anything. "It's a business thing," he continued. "High-level conversations. We need people in the room who can contribute to that kind of dialogue. And no offense, but I just don't see how that's you. Audrey agrees, by the way. She wanted me to call you so it didn't get awkward." I looked at the corn on the grill. One of the husks had started to blacken at the edge. "All right," I said. "Good. I figured you'd understand. Take care." And he hung up. I stood there for a moment. Buck lifted his head, looked at me, then put it back down. I turned off the grill, wrapped the food in foil, and took it inside. I sat at the kitchen table and I did not eat. I just sat there in the quiet with the overhead light buzzing faintly above me, and I thought about what my son-in-law had just said. "I just don't see how that's you." I thought about whether to call Audrey. I picked up the phone twice and put it back down. She knew about the call, apparently. She let him make it. That told me something. "My name is Russell Hale. I'm 64 years old, and I have never once in my life introduced myself with a title or a number, not in casual conversation, not at dinner parties, not anywhere. My daughter grew up in a modest house in suburban Ohio. I drove the same truck for 11 years. I coached Little League until my knees gave out. I fixed my own gutters, mowed my own lawn, bought store-brand cereal, and wore the same pair of work boots from November to March every single year." What Miles Thornton did not know, what he had never bothered to find out, because men like him don't ask questions about people they've already classified as unimportant, was that I had spent 31 years building infrastructure project management software. Not the flashy kind. Not the kind that gets you on magazine covers. The kind that runs quietly in the background of water treatment facilities, highway construction contracts, public utility bids, and municipal planning offices across 22 states. I sold the company 9 years ago. I won't say the number here. But I will say it had 9 digits, and it was not close to the low end of that range. I didn't sell out of necessity. I sold because I was 65 and tired, and because the right buyer came along and valued what I'd built honestly. I kept a small advisory stake, rolled the rest into a private holdings portfolio managed out of a quiet office in Columbus, and went home to my truck and my grill and my dog. I never talked about it because I never needed to. Audrey knew. Or I thought she knew what it meant. Maybe she'd never fully understood the scale of it. Maybe Miles had spent enough time dismissing me that she'd started to see me through his eyes. I thought about all of this at my kitchen table on a Tuesday night in October. Then I got up, went to bed, and slept fine. The planning session was that Saturday. I knew because Audrey had mentioned it 3 weeks earlier at dinner before any of this happened, excited, talking about Miles's expanding portfolio, the new commercial real estate venture he was trying to launch, the investors he'd been courting. I had listened. I had asked questions. I had been interested the way a father is interested in whatever his daughter is excited about, even if he can see the cracks in the foundation she can't. Miles was trying to raise $2.4 million for a mixed-use development deal in the Columbus metro area. He had a lead investor, a firm out of Cincinnati, and a handful of smaller backers. He needed the lead firm to commit by the end of November or the timeline collapsed. He also needed a site controller's approval on one of the properties he'd optioned. What Miles did not know was that the lead firm, a real estate investment group called Meridian Capital Partners, had been a client of mine for 6 years before the sale. The managing partner, a man named Doug, had worked with my software on 3 state contracts and had called me personally when the acquisition went through to say it was the best business decision he'd ever benefited from. Doug and I still had lunch twice a year at a diner in Dublin. We talked about his grandkids, my dog, the Buckeyes. He had never met Miles Thornton. The other thing Miles did not know was that the site controller whose approval he needed, a man who oversaw planning permissions for a 3-county development zone, had been my college roommate for 4 years at Ohio State. His name was Patrick. We still texted about the same nothing we'd always talked about. He had also never met Miles Thornton. I did not call either of them that week. I grilled my pork chops. I watched baseball. I let the week go by. Audrey called me on Friday. "Dad, I just wanted to make sure you weren't upset about this weekend." I was in the garage reorganizing a shelf of hardware. I set down a box of wood screws. "I'm not upset," I said. That was true. Miles just thought it would be better to keep it focused. It's really a business conversation. He explained. "He did?" She sounded surprised. Or maybe relieved. I couldn't tell which. "He called Tuesday. Said it was high level and he didn't see how I could contribute. I told him that was fine." A pause. "He said you were totally understanding about it." I was. Another pause, longer this time. "Are you sure you're okay, Dad?" I looked at the shelf. Everything was already where I wanted it. I'd just been moving things around out of habit. "I'm good, sweetheart. Tell me about the deal. Is it going well?" She brightened immediately, the way she always does when someone asks about something she loves. She talked for 15 minutes about the property, the projected return, the timeline. I listened to all of it. I asked about the investors. She mentioned Meridian Capital by name. I said that sounded like a solid firm. She said Miles had been working on that relationship for 8 months. I said I hoped it came together for them. I meant that. I wasn't lying. Part of me genuinely hoped the deal worked out. The part of me that was her father and that would always want good things for her regardless of what her fiancé thought of me. The other part of me had already made a decision, though not in anger, in clarity. I would not be calling Doug on Miles's behalf. I would not be making introductions. I would not be smoothing any paths or pulling any strings. I would simply be absent from the conversation, the way I'd been asked to be absent from the room. What happened next would happen on its own. The meeting was Saturday. I know because Audrey texted me a photo afterward. The group of them at a long conference table in what looked like a downtown WeWork, everyone smiling in the stiff way people smile for photos they intend to post. Miles was at the head of the table. He had his jacket on, his tie loosened just enough to look effortlessly professional. Audrey was beside him, glowing the way she does in photographs, that wide, easy smile she's had since she was 7. I saved the photo. I looked at it for a while. Then I texted back, "Looks great. Hope it went well." She sent 3 heart emojis. The first sign something had gone wrong came 11 days later. Audrey called on a Wednesday, voice a little tight, asking if I'd heard of a company called Meridian Capital. I said the name was familiar. She said they passed on the deal. No explanation given, just a polite form letter saying they were redirecting their Q4 capital elsewhere. Miles was convinced someone had poisoned the well. He was furious. He'd been so sure about that relationship. I said that was too bad. 3 days after that, she called again. The site controller had put the planning permit on administrative review. Something about an incomplete environmental assessment in the original filing. It wasn't a denial, but it pushed the timeline out by at least 6 weeks. The Cincinnati firm had a hard deadline. A 6-week delay was effectively a death sentence for the deal. I said these things happened. "Miles is really stressed," she said. "He thinks someone is working against him." "Has he made any enemies?" I asked, not cruelly. Genuinely. She went quiet. Then, "He says no." I let that sit. "Dad, is there anything you could do? You know people in Columbus. I know you never talk about it, but you do. Could you maybe just make a call, talk to somebody?" I sat with that question for a long time before I answered, not to be dramatic, just because I wanted to be honest with her, and honest with myself about what I was about to say. "Audrey, I wasn't invited to the meeting. Your fiancé called me and told me I had nothing to contribute. He made a decision about what kind of person I am and what kind of room I belong in. I didn't argue with it then. I'm not going to argue with it now. I'm not going to argue with it now. Silence. That's not. Dad, that was just about the meeting. That wasn't about this. I know that's how it felt to him, I said. But when a man tells you what he thinks of you, I think it's respectful to take him at his word. She started crying. Not loudly. Audrey has never been a loud crier. Just those small, quiet sounds that mean something is broken through whatever composure she was holding together. I didn't know he called you, she said. I mean, I knew he was going to talk to you about not coming, but I didn't know what he said. He was direct, I said. I appreciated that. Dad, I love you. I'm not angry. But I think you need to have a real conversation with your fiancé about what he values and whether those values match yours. That's not about the deal. That's about the two of you. I heard her take a long breath. He's a good person, she said. It sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. Maybe so, but good people can still have blind spots big enough to walk right through. The deal collapsed completely by mid-November. Without the lead investor, the smaller backers pulled out one by one. The site went back to its original owner. Miles had apparently put a significant amount of his own capital into pre-development costs, architectural renderings, legal fees, option payments, and most of it was gone. Audrey didn't call to tell me. I heard through her aunt, my sister-in-law, Barbara, who called to relay information the way Barbara has always done, with the breathless urgency of someone delivering breaking news about a school board vote. I thanked Barbara and let her talk herself out. Miles came to my house on a Saturday morning in late November. I didn't know he was coming. I heard a car in the driveway and looked out the kitchen window and saw his leased BMW sitting crooked like he'd pulled in fast. I opened the front door before he knocked. He looked different than I'd ever seen him. The jacket was there but wrinkled. There were circles under his eyes, that the kind of sleep you get in good hotels doesn't leave behind. These were the circles you get from genuinely bad nights, from lying awake with your thoughts eating you alive. He stood on my porch and said nothing for a moment. "Come in," I said. "Coffee?" He came in. He sat at my kitchen table in the same chair where I'd sat alone after his phone call in October. I poured 2 cups and sat across from him. He didn't start with the deal. He started with the phone call. "Audrey told me what I said to you," he said. The exact words. He looked at the coffee cup instead of at me. I didn't realize she was going to repeat it back to me like that. Hearing it out loud was different than how it sounded in my head. I didn't say anything. "I want you to know I don't actually think you're—" I wasn't trying to say you weren't capable. I just thought— He stopped. Started again. "I have this habit of categorizing people by what they can do for me professionally. I know that's not a great quality, but with you I just never— I didn't take the time to actually ask, and that was arrogant. I know that." He looked up then. His eyes were honest, I'll give him that. Whatever else he wasn't lying to me. "I need help," he said. "I know I have no standing to ask you for anything. But Audrey loves you and she's devastated, and I think part of what she's devastated about isn't even the deal. It's that I treated her father like he didn't matter, and she didn't say anything. And now I think she's not sure she can trust herself around me." That one landed. I could see it cost him to say it. "She asked me to ask you," he said. "Not for a handout, not for an introduction. Just, she wants you to come to Sunday dinner. She wants to start over." I looked at this young man sitting in my kitchen, 32 years old, driven past the point of self-awareness, the kind of ambitious that can take a person somewhere great or somewhere catastrophic, depending entirely on whether they're capable of learning the right lessons at the right time. I thought about my daughter, her wide, easy smile, the way she had said he's a good person like it was still a question. "I'll come to Sunday dinner," I said. Some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "But I want something from you first," I said. "Not a favor, not business, just an honest answer." I waited until he looked at me. "What do you actually know about me? Not what you assumed. What do you know?" He opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head slowly. "Almost nothing," he said. "That's right. You made up your mind about the kind of man I was, and then you stopped looking. That's the thing that concerns me more than any deal, Miles. Not for my sake, for Audrey's." He sat with that. "I hear you," he said quietly. "Good." I stood up, refilled my coffee. "Sunday dinner. I'll bring something." Does she still like that apple cake from the place on 5th? He blinked. Yeah, she loves that. All right then. I called Doug the following week. Not about Miles's deal. That window was closed. I called because it had been a while and I wanted to catch up. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. Before I hung up, I mentioned casually that my daughter was engaged to a young developer in Columbus, ambitious kid, learning the hard way how to build relationships before he builds buildings. Doug said those were the ones who turned out best usually. I said I thought so too. I also called Patrick and told him I'd heard his office had flagged a permit review. He said administrative reviews were slow but not permanent, that they cleared eventually for projects with solid fundamentals. I told him that was good to know. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't arrange anything. I just planted the kind of seeds that a man plants when he's decided to stay in the garden. Whether Miles would ever know any of that, whether he would figure out over time what he'd nearly walked away from and what he'd almost thrown away, that wasn't my concern. My concern was my daughter. My concern was showing up to Sunday dinner with an apple cake from the place on 5th and sitting at the table like I belonged there, because I did. I had always belonged there. That was never the question. The question was whether he'd eventually be smart enough to figure it out. Driving home from that first Sunday dinner, windows down in the cold November air, Buck's head in my lap from the back seat because he refuses to learn boundaries, I thought about the call in October, the pork chops I hadn't eaten, the kitchen table, the buzzing overhead light. I had never been angry. I want to be clear about that because people sometimes confuse calm with acceptance and acceptance with weakness. I was calm because I already knew something Miles would spend the next hard months figuring out on his own, that the most powerful thing a man can do when someone underestimates him is absolutely nothing. Just wait. Let them show their hand. And then decide, quietly, with no audience, what kind of man you're going to be about it. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a minute in the dark. Buck licked my ear. Yeah, I told him. I know. I've been thinking about that Tuesday evening a lot lately. The burned pork chops. Buck asleep under the chair. The way Miles's voice sounded on the phone. Not cruel exactly, just completely unbothered. The way people sound when they've already decided you don't matter enough to soften the blow. What strikes me now isn't the anger I didn't feel. It's what I did feel, which was something quieter and harder to name. A kind of recognition. Because Miles wasn't the first person to look at me and see a retired man in old jeans with nothing useful left to offer. He was just the first one bold enough to say it out loud to my face. Here's what I've come to understand about cause and effect, not in any mystical sense, just in the plain, observable way that a life lived long enough teaches you. How you treat people is a decision you make about yourself, not about them. Miles made a decision. And every consequence that followed was the natural result of that decision, not punishment, not fate, just the world working exactly the way it always does. He dismissed me because he thought I had nothing. He lost $2.4 million because he never took the time to find out what I actually had. That's not karma. That's just arithmetic. What saved him, in the end, wasn't luck. It wasn't me deciding to be generous. It was the fact that he sat down at my kitchen table and told the truth. He said, I don't know anything about you, and I was arrogant, and I think I'm losing my daughter's trust. Those are hard words for a man like Miles to say. They cost him something real, and I think that cost, paying it honestly, without excuses, was the beginning of something worth watching. Audrey asked me once, years ago when she was maybe 14, why I never bragged about what I'd built. I told her that a man who leads with his resume is a man who doesn't trust the rest of himself to be enough. She rolled her eyes the way 14-year-olds do. I think she's starting to understand it now. The 3 things I tried to live by, and failed at, and tried again, are pretty simple when you strip away the noise. Do right by people even when it costs you something. Stay curious enough to keep learning, because the moment you think you've figured out who belongs in what room, life has a way of humbling you. And hold on when it's hard, because the decisions that matter most are the ones you make when you're tired and hurt and nobody's watching. I'm not a saint. I thought about calling Doug and Patrick and making sure that deal never recovered. I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't cross my mind. But I also knew that living well and living small are 2 different things. And I've worked too hard to let a 32-year-old with a leased BMW make me into someone I don't recognize. Russell Hale drove home that first Sunday dinner with his dog's head in his lap and the November air cold through the open window. And that was enough. That was everything, actually. Some things don't need an audience to be real.